Thanks for coming. I'm very privileged to introduce our speaker today, who's a friend of mine. This is Josh Blackman. I'll first warn you, I found out this morning, and I should have figured this out. Josh is originally from New York, so he tends to talk quickly. He has been working on it.
Lies. Speaks lies.
He now lives in Houston, Texas, and he is a law professor, and his students have told him that speaking quickly does not work as well in Houston, Texas.
I've done better in the South, I've learned.
So if that ever comes problem, we'll be happy to slow down. Josh is very impressive legal scholar. I first became aware of his work. He is a very prolific writer. He has a blog that blogs mainly on legal issues, maybe exclusively on legal issues, joshblackmanblog.com, is that right? He has over 10,000 posts on that. He's published right at 24 law review articles. He's been quoted or had contributions in several major newspapers, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post. He was named by Forbes magazine as part of their 30 under 30 group for legal professionals. So I will say, as somebody who shares his baby face, he has exceeded what I've done with that baby face by far. So he's going to speak today on a topic that I think he probably was the first to identify as a significant legal issue, but as he'll explain, has become a court case and will certainly come up some more in the future. So without wasting any more time, like I said, please continue eating. I know we're trying to cram it in, but to give Josh plenty of time today, we're going to go ahead and get started. So Josh Blackman.
Thank you. Welcome. It's a pleasure to see everyone. It's wonderful to be in Birmingham. It's my first time in Alabama, and I've been very warmly welcomed by Aaron and some of his colleagues. So today we have a treat. You get not only one constitutional amendment, but two constitutional amendments. And our discussion today involves something very new and cool called 3D printed guns. And the discussion today focused on the question of, can the government ban 3D printed guns? And as Aaron mentioned, this is no longer a mere academic topic. I wrote an article on this about 2 years ago, and since then I've actually gone together and we filed a federal lawsuit on this very topic. So there's currently pending a constitutional challenge to the government's censorship of 3D printed guns, which I will discuss in a minute. So in full disclosure, I am not just a mild mannered law professor, I'm actually a real lawyer, which is something which people in this room may appreciate to varying degrees. So first of all, 3D printing, right? What is 3D printing? The same way that you can design an object in a piece of paper, it's 2 dimensions, you can design an object in a computer that's in 3 dimensions, as length, width, and height. So you can design a house, you can design a car, or anything else that you want. You can say, here's the width, here's the length, here's the height. But the cool thing about a technology called 3D printing is you can transform the object on the screen into a real live object. So how does this work? I'll give you a very basic tutorial. It'll take 30 seconds. It involves numbers. I know lawyers hate numbers. I'll make this very easy, okay? Actually involves geometry too, even worse. So everyone may remember what a cylinder is, right? Like a bottle of water. And as you know, a bottle of water has a height and a radius, which is basically the width of the circle, okay? What if I told you that there was a cylinder with a height of 20 and a radius of 5? You would know roughly how big that cylinder is in 3 dimensions. Like this, for example, okay? So using words, using plain words and numbers like I would use to describe anything else, you can actually design an object on the screen, and then the computer knows how to create it in real life, okay? This is the basis of 3D printing. And the way I describe it is like making a candle. Everyone knows how to make a candle. You take a wick of wax, a string, you dip it in the wax, you dip it again, you keep dipping it. And each time you dip it, the candle gets a little bit thicker. And as the candle gets thicker, it becomes a full object, okay? 3D printing works in the exact same way. You design the shape of the object in the computer, and by putting thin layers of plastic, one on top of the other, you can create an actual real-life thing. So you can make some crazy things with 3D printing. So here's some simple objects, a pair of glasses, these little toys, these little castles. You can also make complicated objects like these spheres. And you can print them using something called a 3D printer. And the 3D printer works exactly like it sounds. it can make three-dimensional objects by laying very thin layers of plastic. So here's a diagram. We want to here make a ball, the simplest shape you can imagine. The 3D printer has a little nozzle. At the tip of the nozzle, it sprays a little bit of plastic. And by spraying different amounts of plastic onto the object below it, it can actually build up layer upon layer upon layer. Here's another idea of how it looks. So I want to next show you a demonstration of what 3D printing looks like. It'll be manufacturing an object that I'm sure many of you know what it is. And when you know what it is, call it out and just yell once you see it, okay? You'll see it in a minute. So you start off with this honeycomb pattern, same way a bee makes a honeycomb. This kind of hexagon series of shapes to make something in reality. So you put down a thin layer of plastic. You put down more plastic. You put down more plastic. You see it keeps getting taller and taller and taller. But it's not just a cylinder, it's a shape. You see there are different contours in it. It gets taller and taller. When you see what it is, call it out. You'll see in about a minute. And it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger by laying down these thin layers of plastic. Anyone see it yet? No. Close, close. Close? Yoda. Who said it? Prize right there. It's Yoda from Star Wars, right? And I wouldn't say it's it now, right? So you get it. People have gotten it earlier than you. That's pretty good, okay? So you actually can create, using only 3D printing, these very detailed, intricate objects. You go all the way to the top, and you close off the head, okay? Now, if anyone does any sculpting or artwork, you can make this yourself. You could chisel something out of stone. You could chisel out of clay. Maybe you can sculpt this in other medium. But what 3D printing allows you to do is take an object that you've designed in the computer and make it into a real-life three-dimensional object. And while this may take hours to sculpt by hand, it only takes about 5 minutes to print with a 3D printer. It's a very quick and fast process, right? So of course we can now design these objects in 3 dimensions and make these really interesting devices. So of course, what's the first thing that people want to build with this technology? Guns. Guns, thank you. Yes, guns, right? When you give people, and come in Alabama, you should know this one, right? When you give people a new technology and they can make something without the government knowing about it, what's the first thing they're going to do? Guns. This is American as apple pie. So I need to discuss for a moment a gun called the Liberator. It's a very aptly named gun. Okay, this is actually the 3D blueprint for the barrel of the gun. So this is Cody Wilson, who now for the first time I can actually say is my client. I couldn't say that before because the case hadn't filed yet. We now have a filed case. Cody was a law student at the UT Law School in Austin. And he's something of an anarchist, to put it mildly. And he will be the first person to admit that, so I'm not disparaging my client in any way. And he wants to use 3D printing as a way to empower people to make their own firearms. So about 2 or 3 years ago, he began experimenting with this technology. So he designed this. So for those of you in Alabama, you should know, this is an AR-15 lower receiver. Right, this is what makes an AR-15 gun work. It's the guts of the gun. This is the part that's very heavily regulated by the federal government. Cody found a way to print one himself. And when he puts it into an AR-15, it becomes a real live working gun. Okay, Cody didn't stop there. He also designed this. See this little white magazine, right? He named that the Cuomo, after the governor of New York, the Cuomo magazine, because the governor of New York banned high-capacity magazines. And he found that he could fire thousands of rounds from this 3D printed magazine, okay? But Cody wasn't done yet. He had designed all these parts for existing guns, but he had the idea of creating a gun made entirely out of 3D printed materials. This, my friends, is the Liberator. It doesn't look like much. In fact, it doesn't look like anything if you look at it like this. But these are the parts made entirely with the 3D printer of a handgun, a pistol. It's entirely made of plastic with the exception of the bullet, duh, right? You know, bullets cannot be made out of plastic, cannot be very good. Rubber bullets are not very effective. And a nail, which is used as the firing pin. Everyone know what a firing pin is? I give this talk sometimes in New York. Like, what's a firing pin? My God, what is a bullet? Like I have to remember where I am. So okay, I think here I'm in friendly territory. So this is more or less what the gun looks like when you put together those 16 separate parts. And here it is on one of Cody's first tests. So the very first time Cody tried shooting it, he didn't pull the trigger himself because it might blow up in his hand. They put a little string and stood like 15 feet away, yoink, right? But he fired it many times, and eventually he was able to create a functional gun, and eventually he targeted it himself, and it worked well. This is not a very good gun. First of all, it only holds one bullet at a time. That's not very effective for anything. Second of all, it's very expensive and time-consuming to make. It may take a full day of labor. It takes several $1,000s in equipment to make this gun. It's not very good. I mean, even though it can withstand a number of shots, eventually it will get melted a little bit. This is not a good gun. You're not going to use this if you want to do something bad. This is your last choice. But Cody is breaking rule number 1 by pointing a gun at someone. I did not advise him on this one. Had a problem. Okay, so what is the problem? There is a rampant fear that the way 3D printed guns works is you press print on your computer, and a fully functional handgun spits out like a hot pocket, right? Just it comes right out. You know, you need the right ink cartridge, right? Whatever. Hewlett Packard, boom, right? This is a fear that's been spurred by people who know nothing about guns. It's true. People who know nothing about guns, about gunsmithing, and even gun maintenance have this morbid fear that people will start printing 3D guns in their basements and using this. What they don't appreciate is a simple fact that you can make a gun already very easily, much cheaper and much easier. So everyone know what a zip gun is, right? I mean, again, when I give this talk at NYU, I can't make that assumption, which I did about a month ago, right? A zip gun is a homemade gun made from parts you can buy at the hardware store. So if I went to the nearest hardware store and I bought a garden hose nozzle and a soldering gun, that's what this is. That's a nozzle and a garden hose, and that's a soldering gun. I can make a gun. It'll take me maybe $8 in parts, maybe 20 minutes to weld it together. We're not talking about something difficult. And I'll tell you, this gun is probably a lot better than the Liberator, because it's actually made of metal, handles some tolerance for heat. Okay? Here's another type of a zip gun. This is one of those little keychain flashlights. You see these, right? You put a little bullet in there, you go boom, and it's a gun, right? If you can strike a gunpowder round, you have a gun. Okay? So I want to show you a video. Do not try this at home. These idiots made a zip gun in their garage. Again, these are morons. I'm showing you this to illustrate a point. Do not try this at home. So what do we have here, right? We have a piece of rubber tubing, okay? We have a shotgun shell and a small metal pipe. Again, you can go to the hardware store and buy these parts for maybe $5. We're not talking about a lot of money here, okay? So at the tip of this pipe is a little dimple. That becomes a firing pin. So, again, these guys are not very smart. You load the shotgun shell into this rubber tube, okay? You put, by the way, everyone noticed this in the corner? That's an electrical outlet. And you can see all the holes in the box right here. So they've done this before. They're shooting at an electrical outlet. Again, these are idiots. But I'm making this point so even idiots can make a gun without a computer, okay? So right, so you load in the shotgun shell. You see here the little cartridges there. You take, ready for this, boys? You take the firing pin and you jam it into the back of the shotgun cartridge. Again, you see the outlet right there. What do you think happens? Boom. You just made a gun. And if you look close, you can see another hole just opened up on the box, right? You've just made a gun out of $5 a part that you could probably even bring onto an airplane because, you know, what's a rubber tubing? What is that, right? And you can see here, look, they're so proud. It's, you know, you see smoke coming out of the shotgun shell. These guys are idiots, but they were able to make a gun. What's the point of this demonstration is to prove that making a gun is not difficult. And even more so, this may surprise you, it's perfectly legal. Under alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, you know, our favorite convenience store, right? Under their regulations, there is nothing wrong with making a gun for personal use. If you try to sell that gun, then you need a license and FFA and all this other stuff, right? But if you just want to make your own gun for personal use, there's absolutely nothing stopping you. If it's a machine gun, there's some other weird rules, but for the most part, making a rifle or a handgun is perfectly legal under state and federal law. Okay? So then what's the problem, right? If these idiots in the garage can make a gun on their own, why can't Cody print his 3D weapon? This is the basis of what was at first a law review article and became a federal case about 3 weeks ago that very well will go to the Supreme Court in 2 years. You'll be hearing about it now at the ground floor. This could actually go to the court in about 2 or 3 years if we lose enough. Hopefully we win and this doesn't go to the Supreme Court, but if it does, you know, we'll be there. So what happened to Cody? Okay, Cody put on the internet the blueprints, the files of how to make these guns. He didn't ship guns anywhere. He didn't mail anyone a gun. He didn't even make a gun. He simply put on the internet information, instructions, if you will, of how to make this gun. What did the State Department do in response? They sent him a letter telling him to take down his files immediately. Where I'm from, that's called censorship. Where I'm from, that violates the First Amendment. Okay?
Did you say the State Department?
Yes, the State Department. So why the State Department, right? What the heck does John Kerry have to do? He served in Vietnam, right? What does John Kerry have to do with 3D guns? Arms control export laws. There are federal laws limiting the exports of arms. These were laws passed during the Cold War to prevent us from shipping munitions to Cambodia, okay? These are very old, antiquated laws. The State Department said that the file, a piece of information, is a munition. I'm not joking you. A file is a munition that the State Department can regulate. That's why we went to court. So what is the First Amendment issue here, right? It's a simple act of censorship, what we call a prior restraint of speech, which, as I'm sure you all study in law school, is the core of our First Amendment. We do not allow prior restraints. We do not need to seek the government's permission before speaking. The newspaper in your town does not seek permission before it publishes an editorial. We do not countenance censorship. Wait a minute, Josh. Whoa, whoa, whoa. But this is dangerous speech, right? This is not, you know, a political ad or, you know, something about culture, art. You're telling people to make a gun. Has anyone heard of the Anarchist Cookbook? Everyone know about this? This is a book. When books are still, you know, there's bookstores at one point, you can go to the bookstore, take this book off the shelf, and it will teach you how to make a pipe bomb, how to poison someone, right? Bill Ayers and Bernie Dorn, you know, this was their Bible, right? States and cities tried to ban this book. They tried to ban the sale of the Anarchist Cookbook. And what did the court say? No. No. The mere fact that speech can be used to facilitate crime does not mean it's unprotected. The mere fact that you can use speech for bad stuff, the fact that I can buy this book and use the instruction to build a bomb, that does not mean it lacks First Amendment protection. Under the First Amendment, unless speech causes an imminent threat of imminent harm, right? You're about to do something that breaks the law. Unless that happens, it's protected. Okay? So that's easy. But say, wait a minute, Josh, we're not talking about a book here. We're talking about data. We're talking about a computer file, right? How is a computer file protected by the First Amendment? Oh, this is even easier. Information is speech. The Supreme Court has held in many cases involving video games, computers, using electronic media is speech. If I make a violent video game, the mere fact I'm doing it on a computer and not in a book does not deprive of the First Amendment value. I'll tell you one more in a case called Sorrell v. IMS Health, decided about 3 or 4 years ago now. The court held that the, quote, creation and dissemination of information are speech. It's not just creating speech, it's disseminating it, sharing it, or as we do today, putting it on the internet. Posting speech on the internet is the quintessential means of communication for our generation. That is how we communicate. And for the government to say, you need our permission before you engage in speech is so unconstitutional on so many levels. Okay? Everything in our world, like Neo in the Matrix, is data. And the mere fact that we're communicating instructions of how to do something with data does not deprive it of First Amendment values. So the government's actions here suffer greatly under the First Amendment. But wait, there's more, right? This is not just a matter of First Amendment law, right? We're not just speaking about, politics or art or culture. We're speaking about the right to keep and bear arms, a constitutional right recognized by the Supreme Court in District of Columbia versus Heller, right? In Heller, what happened? The District of Columbia wanted to ban, or not wanted to, they did, for nearly 3 decades, they banned the possession of handguns. If you lived in DC, you could not keep a gun under no circumstances. Dick Heller actually had a gun from the 1970s. He had to keep it locked up. I have a picture of it somewhere. Hold on, let me find it. He actually had to keep his gun locked up. If at any point he removed this lock from his gun, he would be a felon. I'll give you one better. Under DC law, there was no exception for self-defense. If someone broke into his house and was threatening his life, and he unhooked that gun to shoot the person, he would prosecute not only for murder, but for illegal possession of a firearm. Think about that one for a second. Anyway, so going back to Heller. In Heller, the Supreme Court held that the Second Amendment protects an individual right, not connected to the militia, to keep and bear arms. A few years after that, we have the case called McDonald v. City of Chicago. This was Otis McDonald. This case held that the Second Amendment was incorporated or extended to the states. And not only can the federal enclave of DC not violate these rights, but the states can't either. Up until that point, Chicago also had a handgun ban. That, thankfully, is no more. I should note the attorney for both Heller and McDonald is a lawyer named Alan Gura, who is my co-counsel on the 3D gun case. So we are loaded, as they say, for the Supreme Court battle. We have a very good legal team with myself, Alan Gura, and Matthew Goldstein. I think we have a fine legal team. Again, not just a law professor, I'm actually a real lawyer in this limited. My name's the last on the signature block. I'll confess that one, but I will gladly take that one because I think I have some really smart lawyers on our team. Anyway, this is a cool picture of Heller and McDonald shaking hands. I was actually there that day at the court, so I remember this one. So, but what does this mean to Second Amendment, right? So the court hasn't taken a Second Amendment case now in about 5 or 6 years. It's driving me crazy because the lower courts are going every which way in the Second Amendment. It's actually something of a mess. So we have to actually think about what the right to keep bear arms means. And I'm going to argue that there are 2 aspects of the Second Amendment that are relevant here. So the first one we call the right to acquire arms. What do I mean by that? Okay. If I have a right to keep and bear arms, I have to get the guns from somewhere, right? Imagine a situation where the government said, okay, fine, you can have a gun, we'll prohibit the sale of guns. Good luck getting one, right? If you already have a gun, fine, you can keep it, but you can't buy or sell it. That, I think, would fall apart very quickly in any constitutional scrutiny, for the simple reason that owning a gun means you have to get it from somewhere. That would be like saying you can have a book, you can't just buy one, right? So I think we have this right to buy a gun and acquire a gun. Remember Dick Heller with his shackled gun, right? He had a gun, but we had to keep it in chains, literally. So what happened after Heller was decided? Well, he went and he applied for a gun license. You read that says they're approved. And he could now go and buy a gun in the District of Columbia. So I think we can agree that the Second Amendment includes some sort of right to acquire guns, okay? So why is this relevant? Because not the right to acquire guns, I have the right to acquire the means to obtain one, which includes 3D printing technology and the files therein. Second, I think we can make the argument that you have the right to make arms yourself. And this one, I think, is a very good historical legacy. From the time of the American founding, Americans made guns. Back in the American Revolution, the militiamen in Boston were manufacturing their own arms because General Gage seized all the American arms. If you ever watched the John Adams miniseries, which I'd recommend, there's this great scene where Abigail Adams is making these molten balls of lead for the troops to use. It's a Second Amendment fan, it's a beautiful scene, but it's historically accurate too, which is not always the case with these historical movies, right? So if we have a long-standing tradition in the United States of making your own arms, including those idiots in the garage firing a zip gun at an electrical cord, I think it's safe to say that we can also make our own guns. There's nothing illegal about this, right? So if we have a right to acquire arms, we have the right to make arms, okay? I think we can extrapolate from this a pretty good case of why the Second Amendment protects 3D printed guns. We can get information about it, and then we can make our own guns, right? We're sharing the instructions of how to do it and then making the guns ourselves. I think it's a fairly compelling case of why this flies under both the First and the Second Amendments, right? But wait, there's more, as they say. We're not just talking here about the First Amendment or the Second Amendment. It's both. Why? Because the government is censoring us from speaking about our constitutional rights. It's bad enough the State Department seeks to censor speech, but they're censoring speech about how to exercise the Second Amendment. This is a double no-no, as they say, perhaps a double fault, right? When we are speaking about other constitutional rights, you can't do this. If I am speaking about my religion and I am talking about God, right, there's not only a First Amendment speech issue, it's a First Amendment free exercise issue. You have constitutional rights that work together in conjunction. I think this is a beautiful application of what I call the hybrid First and Second Amendment, where you have speech about guns and the government censoring for that reason. That's a content-based restriction. You are censoring speech because it's about a topic you don't like, and you're censoring speech about a constitutional liberty. This, my friends, will not fly. Okay? So I think I've made the case so far, and if you want, the article is distributed with the CLE material, about why the First and Second Amendment protects this right to 3D guns. So let's talk now about the current legal regime concerning 3D printed guns. So the first law is called the Undetectable Firearms Act. This was passed in 1988. And this law is actually fairly simple. It says, any gun must have a certain quantity of metal, enough to trigger a metal detector. Right? This law, I think, makes some sense. It was actually passed in the 1988 session based on the Glock handgun. Everyone know what a Glock handgun is, right? Everyone has one? Okay, yeah. I can't do that in New York. It's a Glock. The reason why this law came about was because of Bruce Willis. We have Bruce Willis to blame, starring as John McClane in the Die Hard movies. So there's one scene in the Die Hard movies where, and I do not have nearly as much swag as Bruce Willis does, but I will try my best. He says, "Luggage? That punk pulled a Glock 7 on me. You know what that is? It's a porcelain gun made in Germany. It doesn't show up on your airport X-ray machines here, and it costs more than what you make in a month." Every single word there is false, okay? There's not a single accurate word in that sentence, which is very difficult, right? There is no Glock 7, okay? That model doesn't exist, okay? It's not porcelain, it's made of metal. It's not German, it's Austrian, okay? It will show up in this X-ray machine because that's metal. And it's actually not very expensive, right? They're fairly cheap guns. They're very affordable, okay? So everything Bruce Willis has said was wrong. But people freaked out and said, oh my God, we have to ban these plastic guns. We have to pass a law So this is what Congress does best. They react to a non-problem, which we'll see again. They react to something that's not actually a problem, whatever. So we have this Undetectable Firearms Act, fine. The gun that Cody produced, the Liberator, has metal in it. So it has a metal firing pin, which would be triggered. I mean, I'm going to the airport in an hour. If I have a quarter in my pocket, they will pick that up, right? So they will pick up a metal firing pin. Even more so, I hate to break this to you, but every gun has something called a bullet. A bullet is made out of metal. I'm sure someone asked me, I forgot where I was, what's something a plastic bullet? Okay, it won't break skin. Okay, that won't be a very useful bullet. So any gun you have will have a bullet in it. Even if the gun's made of plastic, it's still metal, so whatever. This will survive a metal detector. Okay, so what about banning 3D printed guns? So shortly after Cody announced the Liberator, people started freaking out. Namely, someone knew it was coming, my former Senator Charles Schumer, who has never found a constitutional right he didn't want to infringe upon. I'm sure there's some that are left. If there's quarter of troops, you'll find a way. But we have to give Chuck Schumer his due. So Chuck Schumer said, "Oh my God, we have to do this. We have to ban this. We have to, okay." And fortunately, nothing happened. The Undetectable Firearms Act was renewed, and that is basically the only federal law on the books. So there have been various proposals of how to regulate 3D printed guns, all of which are basically bordering between asinine and unconstitutional. So the first one is, let's ban the materials. So actually some scholars said we need to ban the plastics that people are using because then they can't make these guns if we regulate plastics, right? So this is a 1911. It was made on a 3D printer. It's entirely made out of steel, yes. You can actually use a 3D printer to print metal, not just plastic. I held it in my hands. See, it says Solid Concepts Austin. It feels like a good, solid 1911. It's a very good gun, fires at the range like nothing else. So even if you ban plastic, you make a metal gun, which I guess is better or worse, depending on how you count. One of the most crazy proposals I've seen, which I had to actually laugh when I read it, was let's ban gunpowder, right? Let's ban the gunpowder these people are using to make guns so they can't make 3D. Okay, this is stupid, right? In Alabama, I don't even need to do this. In New York's like, that's a good idea. But yes, no, you're not banning gunpowder, right? Okay, what about intellectual property law? Okay, well, this one's actually a more concrete proposal. So it's something called digital rights management, or DRM. And if you remember in the olden days, if you bought a CD and you tried to put it in your computer, it wouldn't work because there's various protections to make sure you can't pirate the music. Remember Napster? And in the olden days, the iPods had various protections as well. You couldn't take a song you bought in the Apple Store and play it on an Amazon device, for example. Everything was very locked down. The thinking was that this digital rights management was killing music, that the musicians wouldn't get the royalties and they'd be in trouble. Okay, this isn't limited to music. So, for example, books. If you have an Amazon Kindle, which I read all the time, basically, when you buy a book on the Amazon Kindle, believe it or not, you don't own the book. So I'll tell you a true story that's very scary. So if you had purchased the book 1984, George Orwell's classic, off Amazon Kindle, one day you woke up and you said, the book is not on my device anymore. Amazon had a dispute with the publisher of the book. So you know what they did? They remotely deleted 1984 from your Kindle device. Scary, right? Of all books, 1984. So you actually don't own the book because there's some sort of digital rights management on it. Well, the real threat to manufacturing comes from 3D printers. I'll tell you why. Why on earth would I spend $200 on a newest pair of Nike sneakers when I can print them myself, right? Why would I spend $400 on the newest iPhone when I can print one myself for 50 bucks, 20 bucks, $10? Why would I buy, a very expensive piece of jewelry when I can just print a fake one myself? Why would I buy an expensive handbag when I can just print one myself? Manufacturers are freaking out about 3D printing because it basically destroys their margin, that they can no longer charge an absurd price for something that which you can bootleg yourself. Speaking of bootleggers, how? I'm in Alabama, moonshine territory, right? How is the manufacturing industry going to stop this? By stopping 3D printing. So let's discuss a concept in economics, which is called the Baptists and the bootleggers. You're laughing. So tell us what's the Baptists and the bootleggers?
It's the alliance of people who are already profiting from an illicit activity and those who want to prevent it from expanding or existing to prevent the legal entrance into the market.
Yes, of course. Thank you. So we have the Baptists, Chicago boy. Okay. We have the Baptists and we have the bootleggers, right? So during Prohibition, right, who are the two main groups that wanted Prohibition? Well, of course, you had the Baptists, the Christians said, no, we need to have no alcohol because of the Bible. Who else wanted Prohibition? The bootleggers. Because once you make alcohol illegal, you can jack up the price and charge more for it, right? Alcohol became much more expensive during Prohibition. In fact, do you have dry counties around here? The reason why you have dry counties is the county on the border is keeping it that way. There's a liquor store around the border, isn't there? The reason why you have a liquor store on the border of every dry county is because you can charge more money that way, right? I have in Texas, there are a bunch of dry counties. So we have a Baptist and bootlegger coalition here, right? So on the one hand, we have the anti-gun people, the Chuck Schumers of the world, who say we cannot have guns because they're evil, right? And then we have the manufacturing industry says, you know what? Let's go with this, right? If we can limit 3D printing, then people can't print their own sneakers. So imagine this. Through either government regulation or perhaps industry standards, a filter is added to 3D printers. So when you try to print a 3D printed gun, it says, sorry, this looks like a gun, we're not going to print it for you. The same way, if you have you might not know this, but if you try to actually print currency on your printer at home, it won't work. You don't even know this. There's actually a filter put on most laser printers that if it senses it's a currency, it actually puts like a watermark over it. Yeah, you don't know about this. These exist. So by the same token, you can actually get filters installed onto printers. If it senses it's like a gun, it's going to stop it. So this is stupid. It won't work for a minute because you have any modicum of technical knowledge to print a gun. You can hack this and get around it. But more so, it will inhibit expression in ways we can't imagine. What if I want to print a toy gun? What if I want to print a javelin? What if I want to print something that looks like a garden hose? I don't know. You now have the government obtaining permission before you can print stuff, which is dangerous. Lastly, I want to talk about export controls, which is the basis of the lawsuit, which my co-counsel and I filed on behalf of Cody Wilson and Defense Distributed, which is his company. So there's something called ITAR, which is International Traffic in Arms Regulations. It's this complicated and onerous system of regulations. It was really created during the Cold War as a means to prevent the American people from shipping, quote, munitions overseas to our enemies. I mean, it makes sense we should be shipping missiles to the Soviet Union. Okay, I'll accept the validity of this, right? But the problem is that over the last 3 or 4 decades, the State Department, which administers this regime, has interpreted the definition of munitions to include books, okay? This is where we know we've run afoul, where a book about cryptography, which discusses encryption, is a munition. And the government's basically taken the position that you need their permission to ship a book to England. Okay? This is scary, right? This is scary that to post a book or information about code is now considered a weapon system. Not the actual weapon itself, information of how to build it. And this requires government permission in advance. So on May 8th, 2013, we just got the statute of limitations. We got it by like 5 days, but we got it, okay? On May 8th, 2013, the State Department sent a letter to Defense Distributed and Cody Wilson in Austin, and they said, you put on all these files, the Liberator pistol, all these different things. Yeah. Read this. All such data should be removed from public access immediately. Think about that for a second. The federal government sent a letter to someone telling him to remove data from the internet. This wasn't classified information. We're not talking about the blueprints for a hydrogen bomb. We're talking about information to build a stupid little pistol that's perfectly legal to own and manufacture. This is wrong. This is unconstitutional. And I hope we win our case and get attorney's fees as well. We are seeking grievance, so maybe we'll get some fees. I don't know. So what makes this even more egregious is that the Justice Department has issued a series of memos going back to the Carter administration saying, hey, State Department guys, you can't do this, right? If you want to limit the export of actual arms, okay, fine, but you can't limit the export of information, of books, of data. This is a bridge too far. And I think this is quite unconstitutional under both the First and the Second Amendments. Thank you very much. And
questions on this, and great presentation. Josh is also a scholar who studied Obamacare litigation. Great depth. I mean, I think he knows as well as anyone. I assume you'd be happy to take questions.
yeah, questions on Obamacare, immigration, guns. I'll be here as long as you want. Alas, the president's been a full-time job the last couple of years. It really is. Yes, sir.
If these Justice Department memos are out there, how has the State Department been preventing people and prosecuting people for exporting software to countries like Iran? And you also made a distinction between classified information and non-classified information. Is that just a matter of property rights?
So I have 3 words: clearly established law. Okay. The fact is, the State Department's ignored these memos for 30 years. There used to be a specific regulation which referenced this. They've taken that reg out, but they're still enforcing it as a matter of practice. So they've effectively taken the position that we're going to do this anyway. They have the memo. The memo is in their possession. We know because we sent it to them certified mail. So they have this memo. It's been on the books for 30 years from the Office of Legal Counsel. So the second item you asked about discusses classified information. There is different case law about it. So the court has said that your First Amendment rights don't stretch to classified information. I don't want to litigate those positions again, but there's very compelling reasons why certain classified information should not be subject to the First Amendment. Now, I don't need to argue those. We're not talking about anything classified. This is perfectly legal, open source information. If you had one part of the question, I think I had all of it.
I was just wondering how the defense counsel for these guys getting prosecuted by state for exporting software avoided a malpractice claim if there are these Justice Department memos backing them up.
You can get, I mean, the other thing that's interesting is we're not just bringing First and Second Amendment, there's also due process. So what I didn't mention was after Cody got that letter, he actually submitted a request to the government to publish these files. That request is still pending 2 years later, right? So I know the government moves slow, but when you have a request to speak and they sit on it for nearly 2 years, that's a bad problem. So I'm not sure what you're referencing, but you can actually seek permission, and if they say yes, then you can do it under certain restrictions. Okay, other questions? Yes, sir.
So this is the State Department and the federal government more largely. What has the state of Texas said about what Cody is doing, and do you have their support in your litigation?
I can't answer that question yet. I mean, I imagine a lot of people, once they learn about this case. So I'll give you one, right? The Los Angeles Times wrote an editorial last week about our case, saying that we should win. Okay. LA Times doesn't like guns. They don't agree with Heller, but they say this is about speech. What makes this case, I think, significant is it's primarily a First Amendment case. Second Amendment comes second. So once people understand that you need permission to engage in speech, that's where they jump on board. I think eventually we'll have a wide range of amici supporting us as this case moves up the ladder. And I'm very, very excited to see this case take about another 2 to 3 years and may even wind to the Supreme Court. Who knows? Yes, sir.
How does copyright and patent law work with this as far as the manufacturing? I'm not going to allow 3D printing on some of their products.
Thank you. So the question is about copyright law. Cody used an open source gun. Had he put online the blueprint for a Glock 19, the Glock company was sent a very nice cease and desist letter, okay? This was an open source gun available to anyone. And what makes it so special is it's a gun which you can find anywhere. The farce of the State Department's censorship is that if I go to Google right now, I can find this blueprint in about 3 seconds. The entire idea of telling one person he can't put his files online, that's going to save anything, is nonsensical. When we talk about narrow tailoring, this is not narrowly tailored at all. Sir?
How did the State Department justify classifying information that they don't know? What authority do they have to classify? It's not of their invention or their creation or innovation or ownership.
Yeah, so the question was, how did the State Department classify this? The short answer is this is a statute. It's based on a statute passed during the Cold War, which was meant to protect against certain munitions being sent out. In a series of memos and regulations over the course of 4 decades, they've expanded the meaning of munitions to be anything we find dangerous.
I've dealt with ITAR.
Oh,
training or anything that gives a tactical advantage to a possible enemy.
Yes, sir.
Expanded and brought it over.
Yes, and you probably know better than I do if you've studied ITAR. It's entirely devoid of the statute. It's in no way consistent with what Congress designed decades ago. And one of the reasons why we brought this suit is because the State Department showed no interest in actually conforming with not only the First Amendment, but just the statute itself. And I think if this case is successful, they're going to have to revisit this entire scheme.
So they're just dropping a label of classification over information.
And it's totally arbitrary and ad hoc, too. Basically, you don't know if something's covered by ITAR until you submit a request. Or, like Cody, you get a letter in the mail saying take this down immediately.
Or you pay for a request. Yeah.
The commodity, it's called a commodity request, a commodity jurisdiction request. So basically, the entire thing is like Star Chamber, right? You don't know what you're doing until they tell you what you've done. And if you already do it, you got to take that letter saying, if you don't take this down now, you're committing felonies. And they're not at all interested in, again, 2 years our request has been sitting. I don't think they're going to do it now. The case has been filed, yeah.
What about serial numbers? They require serial numbers on weapons, as I understand.
Only if it's for sale. If you manufacture your own guns, for example, those idiots in the garage, they do not have to put a serial number. So some states, what they're doing to counter 3D guns, California is considering this, is passing on saying that all guns must have a serial number. And oh, by the way, the only way to get a serial number is if your gun's on a special roster, right? What California does is you can only get a gun on a roster of a couple, whatever, 100 models. If you make your own gun, it's not going to be on this roster of guns. You can't get a serial number, therefore the gun's illegal under state law. So that's what California is trying to do to counter this problem. Okay, other questions?
All right. Thanks again, Josh.
Thank you so much.